IELTS Listening, version 53997. You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. Write all your answers in the listening question booklet. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Now turn to Part 1 on page 2 of your question booklet. Part 1. You will hear a woman talking to a builder who is going to do some building work at her house. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 4. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 4.
Morning, thanks for coming round. I'm Sally.
Morning. So just before we get started, I'll just make a few notes. So, we're at 15 Hill Street.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, great. And then I need to write down your contact information, just for the office, you know. So, first, what's your surname, please, Sally?
It's Keyworth. I'll spell that. Keyworth.
And your phone number, I've got that somewhere. Yes, 027 584 6613.
That's right.
Okay, Sally, so what building work would you like to have done?
Well, let's go into the kitchen first. So, you see, it's quite dark in here. We've tried having a few lights fitted, but it hasn't really made any difference. So, what we've decided is the window is too small. We'd like a larger one.
That shouldn't be a problem. And is there anything else you'd like done in the kitchen?
Well, at this time of year, I shouldn't complain really, but I wish it wasn't so hot in here. Is there anything you can do about that?
Air conditioning?
It's too expensive.
How about a fan, then?
Yes, that would be perfect.
Righto. And what's next, Sally?
Well, if we walk through into the bathroom, the thing is, when my father's staying, he can't use the bath. So I thought here, on the back wall, I'd like you to fit a shower. Is that possible?
Shouldn't be too hard. I'll get you some brochures, because there are a few ways of doing that.
Thanks.
Now, those tiles on the wall look new, so do you want to keep those?
Yes, the tiles are new, but actually my husband doesn't like them. We want to change to those very small ones, but do I have to choose a colour now?
You can do that later. I'll get some charts for you to look at.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 5 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 5 to 10.
Now the last thing, let's walk outside. I need to show you some things outside the house.
Righto. Oh, nice garden. And the fence looks in good condition.
Yes, it's new, but the thing is the gate. It's too low. You have to bend down to open it. We need something that's higher.
Right, I'll see to that.
Then the other thing is the garage here. We had a break-in, actually.
Yeah, I can see. The door should be fine, but the lock. I'll replace that, shall I?
Yes, thanks. Then also, if you step back here and look up on the roof, you can see that it's damaged.
Did that happen in the storm a couple of weeks ago?
Yes, that's right.
I'll get up there and take a look at that then. That might be quite a big job, but I'll get back to you once I've had a look.
OK.
I can see that your rain gutter is broken as well.
Can you fix that?
Well, I'll need to replace it, maybe with a steel one. It'd be stronger.
No, plastic will be fine, thanks. It's cheaper.
OK.
And that's everything, I think. Is there any other information you need? What about a start date?
Well, I'm completely booked all April, and I've got a job on May the 5th. That'll be a few days, so let's say May the 8th.
OK.
Now, what about a key in case you're out?
We have a security code. I'll give you that. It's a mix of letters and numbers. The code is AG4176.
Got that. OK, we'll organise some...
That is the end of Part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 1.
Section 2. You will hear a radio broadcast about a new museum which specializes in vacuum cleaners. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
A new museum has just opened dedicated to vacuum cleaners. Yes, that's right, vacuum cleaners, the machines powered by electricity that suck up the dust and dirt from the floor. The museum's opened in a town called Eastwood in central England. Until now, Eastwood used to be an industrial town where people used to be employed as coal miners. But then, a local resident called James Brown became frustrated with the nation's failure to recognize the importance of vacuum cleaners, and he decided to set up his own museum. James first fell in love with vacuum cleaners when he was only 4 years old. At the time, his mother was unwell, so he used to help her out by vacuuming the house, and it was to be the start of the lifelong love affair with this humble household appliance. However, it wasn't until James was 8 years old that he first acquired his own vacuum cleaner. After it had been thrown away on the streets, he took it home, cleaned it up, and plugged it in. Amazingly, it still worked. And that was the beginning of his collections. By the time he was in his teens, his collections had grown to 30. The collection continued to grow until it reached the final count of 126, which it stands at today. James is delighted to share his enthusiasm of vacuum cleaners with visitors. One of his favorite party tricks is to blindfold his eyes so he can't see and ask someone to switch on one of the machines. When I tested him out on 5 different machines, switching them on and pushing them across the floor, he had no problem telling me the manufacturer of each one, and he could even tell its age. Loading on now a common household appliance. It wasn't until 1950s that most people could afford to buy a vacuum cleaner, as before that they were very expensive. In today's money, you would have had to pay around a third of the price for an average car, which is around 3 months' wages for most people. Like most modern appliances, the invention of a production line halved the price almost immediately. But James is not the only vacuum cleaner aficionado out there, and a few years ago, he made a special trip to the USA to the factory of his favorite, the Kirby vacuum cleaner. There is also an American website called Vacuum Land that's dedicated to vacuum cleaner collectors. This year, they're even holding a convention in Texas with competition, awards, and lectures on the subject. So James might want to pop back to the United States to meet some vacuum lovers. So, if you've been inspired and want to visit James's Vacuum Cleaner Museum, what days could you go to visit? Well, they're open all year round from 9:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. from Tuesdays to Saturdays, except Thursdays when they're open until 7 p.m. and Mondays when the museum is closed.
Before you hear the rest of the broadcast, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen carefully and answer questions 16 to 20.
The history of the vacuum cleaner is an interesting one. The first commercially available powered vacuum cleaner was invented in 1901 and was called the Puffing Billy. It was so large it had to be pulled by horses and parked outside the house where the cleaning was being done. It was initially driven by an oil engine, although it was later adapted to be powered by electricity, and it was used to clean the carpets and the palace of King Edward VII in London. One of the most famous electric vacuum cleaners is known as the Hoover. This was developed in the USA in 1908. It's often thought that it was created by a Mr. Hoover, but in fact, it was created by a James Spangler, who worked as a cleaner in a department store. Mr. Hoover was a businessman who bought the idea and then developed and marketed it in the USA and other countries. The Electrolytes Model 5 was developed in 1925. Up until that time, vacuum cleaners had been heavy devices which were not easily bought from. This was a lighter model which laid on the floor and can be pulled along on 2 strips of metal, and this was an idea that was copied by many other manufacturers. Then there's the Electrolytes 30 or XXX, which was developed in 1937 in the USA and is perhaps the most visually elegant vacuum cleaner of all, with its sleek lines inspired by the Art Deco architecture popular in the 1930s. The most prized model in James's museum is the Kirby model, which is actually gold-plated. Kirby made Peace's trophy, but they also manufacture vacuum cleaners for everyday use, as sold only by salesmen who demonstrated them only in the customer's home. But even the everyday model might eventually become collector's items. Now, if you want to visit the museum,
That is the end of Section 2. You now have half a
Now
minute
turn
to
to
check
Section
your
3.
answers.
Section 3. You will hear 2 students called Eva and Mike discussing their research project on tourism. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Hi, Eva. Is this a good time for us to look at our research project? Our tutor told us to keep the focus narrow. So, what about we go for why people choose to go to certain places and attractions and leave the rest out?
You're right. Otherwise, we'll have far too much information to cope with. Okay, so what about the survey?
Well, I've looked through the ideas we had for questions for it, and I think it's not clear how we use the word area. Sometimes it seems to mean a place, other times the field of our research, and even tourist attraction in some cases.
Oh, I think that's my fault. I typed out our notes.
Oh, it's probably best to use it for place in the sense of province or whatever.
Yes, I think so. You know, we decided to concentrate on culture and tourism. I wonder if we're really saying culture in the same way as most people do, because on our list of places to carry out our surveys, I see you've put the Round Music Festival, which is contemporary music. I thought we were going to be looking at more traditional forms of culture.
That would be confirming these old-fashioned ideas that culture has to be something that's at least 100 years old.
But that is what most people think.
Well, let's not get into an argument about that right now. Let's think about the number of completed questionnaires we need. In total, how many questionnaires do you think we have to get? 100? 200? And over how many different events?
Our tutor said we should have at least 200. Otherwise, the information won't actually mean that much. And I think it's not practical to try to go to more than about 5 events. We've got to get the first draft in by the end of February.
And do you think we should interview everybody or just tourists?
Because presumably there'd be local people, domestic tourists, and international tourists at some events.
In fact, the more I think about it, the more I think we should just go for the tourists, but from overseas as well as national. I'm sure we'd be able to provide more interesting results if we did that.
Right.
There's one thing that worries me, though.
What's that?
We said it's important to get some background on the people who answer our questions, like what's their job, what they thought about the event. But the idea of asking people how old they are…
We can't just ask them to tick a box with an age in it and tell them they don't have to do it if they don't want to. We could write in our own estimate when we've finished.
Are you sure that would be okay?
Yes, it's not the most crucial piece of information they're giving. We're going to have a lot of facts and figures to present. Have you any preference for putting them into a pie chart, a table, or a graph?
Tables are easy to do, but I read that most people find pie charts visually stimulating. I hate reading graphs because unless they're quite big, you don't get exact figures.
Pie chart sounds good. How are we going to divide up the work?
If it's okay with you, I'd like us to meet as often as possible to look at what we've each written up. But we should do the actual writing on our own.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
Okay, would this be a good time to discuss our introduction? An overview of tourism around the world, looking at different tourist attractions in different countries. But there are so many to choose from, though, so let's narrow it down.
Absolutely.
I found out that Mexico celebrates the fact that it produces a huge number of varieties of chilies, and people flock to this special event to taste dishes using them. A lot of people think of Mexico as being the best place to see fantastic museums. That's true, but let's take a different tact. What about Greece, one of the world's most famous countries for tourists?
Yes, and I think we should go for the ruins in this case. The temples and theaters and so on, rather than the food.
And for Britain, instead of focusing on the countryside and parks, I'd like to find out more about why people go to see plays and musicals. Is it because there's such a good choice?
Interesting point. And for India, instead of concentrating on the temples or the game parks, we could mention all the different folk dances. Every region has its own, and they don't just perform them at festivals. They're part of everyday life.
Okay, we've got more than enough. Let's draft the introduction.
That is the end of Part 3. You now have half a minute
Section
to check
4.
your answers.
You will hear part of a lecture for teacher trainees on using drama activities in the classroom. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40 on page 8. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
So now we're going to look at some of the reasons why it's beneficial to include drama activities, such as role play, in your teaching practice in a range of subject areas. There's a lot of evidence to show that drama helps a child's personal development. Firstly, creating the space for children to express themselves freely in a group situation helps to give them confidence in their own opinions and ideas. And, of course, drama activities can work especially well for shy or introverted children who usually don't participate in other types of classroom situations. Secondly, unscripted improvisation activities where children work from their imagination, if done in a supportive way, give children the opportunity to gain experience in taking risks and encourage them to say things that they might normally be afraid to say. Drama can also support the child's educational development. For example, the emphasis placed on cooperative activities in drama means that group members must learn the value of listening to one another. Being involved in any sort of performance which relies on everyone working together and playing their part also helps children to be responsible, not only for their learning, but for their general behavior. These are just a couple of ways in which drama can benefit a child's learning. Now I'd like to look at how role play can be such a valuable learning tool in the classroom. The value of role play for children who are having difficulties as a means of therapy is now widely accepted. The experience of doing a role play where children act out aspects of their own life without explicitly stating that it is a direct representation of their own experiences can help children to judge their own behavior in an objective way. One obvious example would be doing a role reversal, with a bully role-playing a victim. Because this approach doesn't involve direct confrontation, it may help the bully to see his or her behavior in a different light. More generally, role play also allows the teacher to explore potentially controversial or taboo subjects in a safe setting in which children feel at ease. It's obviously essential for children to feel they won't be criticized or judged for voicing certain views. Getting children to examine their thoughts and opinions carefully can lead to a deeper self-knowledge and a stronger awareness of morality. This is an important factor in developing social skills. Let's look at a specific subject area now and think about how drama can enrich the learning process for the study of history. Bringing characters from the past to life in the classroom by doing classroom drama activities is an easy way to improve the level of the children's participation in the lesson. So, drama in the history classroom makes for a livelier atmosphere, but getting children to reenact scenes from history can also be extremely useful, as it helps them to remember what happened and why it was important, as well as helping to bring the past alive. Another way of doing this is to ask children to find solutions to historical problems using role play. This can help to focus attention on why certain decisions were taken. For example, children can be asked to decide how best to defend their town from attack or where to build a new settlement. Okay, what I'd like to do now is to think about your next teaching practice session and in groups discuss how you would incorporate an element of drama into your lesson plan.
That is the end of Section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.